Hello, everybody. We are on our new section, Linguistic Anthropology. Congratulations on finishing the midterm. That'll all be graded pretty soon. So, yeah. All right, let's get into it. Quick announcements. And this week, nothing's due. Except for, sorry, the quizzes are due. No reflection, though. We're getting pretty close to the end. So, please try your best to um, catch up on stuff, get stuff done. You know, yeah, that's it. Pretty much. Like, we have this. And then we have bioanthro, and then we're like basically done. Okay. So just keep that in mind. We're really close to being done. All right. So what can you tell about someone by the way they speak? Okay. Now, the first thing immediately is people think about accents, right? The first thing that's kind of like the first thing that comes to mind. Accents, yes, you could tell whether they're a native English speaker or not, but that's not only what I'm talking about, right? I'm also talking about what else can you tell about not only the person that you're talking to, but also maybe the situation that you're in, right? So, for example, if someone's coming up to you and they're like this before they hit you up, they're looking around. They're probably asking you for directions, right? If someone is running towards you with like a really mean look at their face, they're probably trying, I don't know, to rob you or whatever, right? There's a lot of things you can tell about someone by the way they speak, and it's not just where they're from. Okay. The way that we communicate is not only through language, but language has a lot of other things associated with it that you might not think about. Okay. Hopefully by the end of this lecture, you'll have a better understanding of those things. So let's talk about language. Language is something that only humans have. Okay. Linguistics is the scientific study of language. Now, linguistic anthropology is a little bit different. Linguistics is very concerned with the spelling, grammar, syntax, diction, like all these things about the actual language. Very concerned about that. Linguistic anthropology is more concerned about how is that used in people's lives. Okay. So linguistic anthropology is different from linguistics. Language is a system of arbitrary vocal sounds. We're going to go over that in the next slide, or next two slides. Enables humans to communicate with each other in ways not seen among other animals. This is what I was talking about. Language is unique to humans. Okay. And we're going to talk about that again a little more in the next slide. Is used to encode and communicate about humans' experience of the world and one another. This is very interesting. If you think about most of the information that we consume, it's usually regarding our experience doing something, right? Like even like of course, like today, like I don't know about you guys, but I like to watch like a like maybe not the whole vlog, but like it's like, people's experience eating at this restaurant, people's experience going to the store or whatever. That's kind of like what I like to watch, but I like to consume. But if you think about magazines and books and stuff, we're really like reading about people's experiences. We're not really reading about like pure information, right? And pure information tends to be, even though it's a big part of, again, what we consume, it's not necessarily the format of choice, right? So basically, it's kind of boring if it's just information. But if you think about when we're communicating with other, like a lot of our communication is about our experience with something, and that is very special to humans. Okay, and it's finally a key component of human symbolic creativity. So these six things are what makes human language distinctive. Okay, now human language cannot be used by other animals, right? If other animals are using, they are communicating with you, but they are not using human language. Okay. In order for it to be human language, there need to be these six elements. Okay. This is not to say that animals are not intelligent. It just means that the way they use to communicate, the things they use to communicate are just different from humans. Okay. Now, first one, openness. The ability to understand the same thing from different points of view. This is considered productive. Monkey communication, on the other hand, is closed. Okay, so when we think about things from a different perspective, that's very distinct to humans, right? if I were to tell you that a steakhouse last week that I went to was terrible, the lighting was bad and I had to wait a long time, the waiter was rude. And then Sally tells you, yeah, the that same steakhouse had really good steak, the drinks are amazing, and reservations are recommended or whatever, right? You can understand both of those perspectives on the same thing. That is openness. Okay, our ability to understand things from different perspectives, right? Now, again, these elements might be difficult to understand only because we do it so naturally. Obviously, it's part of our, the way we understand language to begin with. Okay. Now we had this point in the first slide as well. Arbitrariness. For those who don't know, arbitrary just means random. And so what this is talking about is that there's no link between particular linguistic sounds and the meaning. Okay. So the example they have in the textbook, they had the word boy. Boy obviously in English means a young man. And a boy in I forgot. Different language means something else, right? But if you think about like the word apple, right? Apple, manzana, pinguo, right? These are all different ways of saying the same thing. Arbitrariness, the randomness that they're talking about is that there is no like biological link between an apple, for example, and the word apple. Does that make sense? These are all words that are created out of our own, like, oh, I think this should be called apple. Like it's just like a whim. Like we just think about it and we just name it that. Okay. Now that's very important because that also means that all of our language is cultural, meaning that we have to learn a language. We are not born with it. Very important. Okay. Duality of patterning. There's a sound and a meaning. The fact that I'm talking to you right now, there's a sound and it means certain things to you when you listen to it. That is duality of patterning. Displacement, the ability to talk about absent or non-existent objects and past or future events as easily as we discuss our immediate situations, right? So I can talk about things that are literally not here that I've never done before as easily as I'm talking to you right now, right? So I could talk about how, you know, riding in the Titanic must have been sick, or I could talk about how like going to spaceship must suck because I'm floating all the time. I've never done those things, but I can still talk about it, right? I can talk about the Ferrari, like how cool it is to ride in a Ferrari. I've never ridden in a Ferrari before, right? So the way that I'm like, describing those things, which are non-existent, I've never done them before. I have no experience doing them. I can describe it as easily as I'm describing the stuff that I'm describing to you right now. Okay. Past and future events as well as sorry, as easy to discover immediate situations. I can talk about, you know, um 6 years ago when I first started, or it was it 7 years ago. 7 years ago when I started teaching at Kingsborough, the back in the day, the office in the A building was open at night for night classes, whatever. Now it's not, right? I'm talking about the past as easily as I'm talking about my situation right now. Oh, next year during in class, I think I'm going to add another element, another video to my lessons or whatever. I'm talking about the future again as easy as I'm talking about stuff right now. Okay, so our ability to talk about absent and non-existent things, as well as talk about the past and future as easily as we describe our immediate environment, is displacement. Okay. Semanticity, the association of linguistic signals with aspects of the social, cultural, and physical world in which the speakers live. So semanticity is very important. Okay. The association of linguistic signals with aspects of the social, cultural, and physical world. That what that is referring to is basically that the physical world influences how you will speak or your language, and for example, right? So, um, if you live in New York, you probably call a cheese slice a regular slice, right? Or oh no, if you use the terms "I'm mad tight," that is something that is very distinctive to the New York area. Well, I guess not anymore because of TikTok and stuff. But the main point, the point is that our surroundings can affect the way we speak, right? For example, slang in certain places are different than other places, and depending on where you are, you'll learn different slang, right? If you are not, if language is not human, for example, if it's like a cat born in freaking Mexico and a cat born in America, when they communicate, they still communicate with the same things, right? They are not influenced by their environment for how they communicate. We are. Okay. Finally, prevarication, to make statements or ask questions that violate convention, such as the statement, colorless green ideas sleep furiously, does not make any sense, right? So our ability to break rules, prevarication, is also a distinct aspect of human language, right? And especially if you like poetry or rap or like anything again that breaks the convention of speaking, it's a key characteristic of human language. Okay, so these six are the six key characteristics of human language. Now, there are many animals that have certain parts of this, right? But none of them have all six qualities. None of them. Zero. Okay. So that's why it's very important. Yes, might a dog have duality of patterning? Maybe, but it definitely does not have openness and displacement. Okay. All right. So make sure you understand these six. Now, call systems, which is a little bit confusing. Call systems are shared by humans and other primates. Human and non-human primate call systems are not equal to human language. So call systems are basically, for the sake of understanding it in this way, it is a biological form of communication, right? So our ability to laugh, our ability to cry, our ability to, um, like, when we're scared, like that reaction, those things are considered call systems, right? Because they are a natural reaction. Now, note that I'm saying the ability to cry, laugh, and whatever, right? This is important because what makes you cry, what makes you laugh, is not going to be biological. It'll be emotional and physical. It change depending on your cultural situations. But call systems, which are those things, right, is something that we share with other primates as well. So it is no surprise that if you are crying in front of a chimpanzee, let's say, the chimpanzee will recognize that you are sad. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is a biological form of communication. That being said, even though you're communicating with a noise or whatever it is, especially with crying and laughing, call systems and language are two separate things, right? Non-human primate call systems do not map onto elements of human symbolic language. Human call systems are controlled literally by a different part of the brain. Okay, so this type of communication is very, very specific, and it is not language. Okay, it is not language. All right, they're literally controlled by different parts of the brain. Okay, so all you need to do to help you kind of think about it is like, what will monkeys usually communicate about? Food is here, danger is here, can I groom you or whatever, right? Like the communication method and the purpose is very different. When humans are communicating, it is very, very complex, right? It's, hey, you can go in front of me. Hey, you can't go in front of me. Hey, going to, I don't know, Wegmans and eating sushi is like a good idea, right? There's a lot of ways we communicate that other animals, especially chimpanzees, do not know how to do, right? And I point this out specifically to illustrate to you that call systems on one side of the brain and language on the other side. Even though they are both expressing meaning with noise, it does not mean that they are language. Okay, call systems are completely different from language. So, language is a biocultural phenomenon. Now, even though in this class we're going to talk about language from the perspective of culture, because that's what I know, there is also a whole biological side to it. Okay, the human brain anatomy of the mouth and throat give humans a path for language, right? So there's like a whole field of study that will focus on, you know, on the biological side of language, right? I am not that a professor, but I'm just letting you know that there are fields of study that focus on that particular thing. Okay. Languages are cultural products and embedded in meanings and behavioral patterns. Anthropologists recognize that the way people use language provides clues to how they understand their world and themselves. So it is very clear, right? Remember, we're going through four fields of anthropology. Anthropology is a study of humanity, quite generally, right? And language is so important that it is literally its own freaking section, right? So when we're thinking about why it's important for anthropology, one, it's something that's very distinct to humans, right? But two, it also, this is the main thing right here, it gives us an understanding of how the person we're studying and understands their world, right? the language we use, not just the words we use, the language we use, when we use certain words, why we choose certain words. These are all important things to understanding how people will think in their society. Okay. So, anthropological study of language reveals that symbolic language permits humans to communicate, but also sets up barriers. Cultural factors shape language use. There is no single best way for humans to communicate, and a common code in the larger speech community counters individual efforts to create a unique voice. So these are kind of like it's a compilation of important things I want you to understand or remember. Okay. Symbolic language permits humans to communicate, but also sets up barriers. Okay. Cultural factor. Oh, sorry, the first one. This one is kind of related to like human imagination, right? Remember how we talked about how, if we, sorry, there's a bug here. If we all did the most efficient thing, we wouldn't have human imagination. It wouldn't be human because we're not thinking about the problem uniquely, right? Remember, that's one of the distinct things about us as humans. Okay. Now, the thing about this one in particular, right, is that what is the purpose of language? It is to communicate. But ironically, because language is culture, right? Because language is human imagination, it does not follow any kind of path, if that makes sense, right? It's not the most efficient. It's not used mostly to help communicate whatever. Ironically, because of language, it is oftentimes more complicated to communicate with other humans, even though the original purpose is to create more communication, right? And again, the reason why I put that in there is because it relates back to human imagination and how important that is to understanding us as humans, right? Because as humans, we do not make the same decision all the time. It will not follow one way of doing things. And so it is no surprise that for language in particular, right, it doesn't follow the golden rule of improving communication. Okay. Second thing, cultural factors shape language use, right? So we just talked about this a little bit. Cultural factors are very important. What is appropriate to say in this situation? How should you speak when you're in a job interview? How should you speak when you're in a restaurant? What is considered too loud to be indoors? What is considered what is considered not having confidence when you're speaking, right? These are all things that that our culture shapes in terms of what we understand about people that are using language, okay? There is no single best way for humans to communicate their experiences. This is a main point about language that there is a criticism of some languages that aren't as developed. There's no such thing as a more or less developed a more or less developed more or less developed language, right? They are all equally complex if they are made by if they are made by humans. Okay. Um, a common code within the larger speech community counted individual efforts to create a unique voice. Now, this one I actually put in there because there's a good question by a student in my first semester, and he asked me like, "Hey, like, so if language is always cultural, right? We learn how to speak like English, Spanish, whatever. Language is cultural. Why don't we just have our own languages?" And that was a good point. And the main point though is because just like we learned with Judith Butler and gender, right? There's a lot of regulating forces that tell us what is correct and incorrect when we're speaking, right? So, for example, with the Judith Butler example, the one I gave was you're a second grade boy, and you have a pink folder, right? And then when you pull out the pink folder, your table calls you gay. You're like, "Are you a girl?" Whatever. That is a type of regulation, a type of instruction that pushes you into understanding what it is to be a man or a boy, right? So it's the same thing with this, right? With language, if you were to call an apple a pear, right? Your parents or whoever is teaching you at that time will be like, "Oh, no, 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 it's not called a pear, it's called an apple." We are correcting that person. And that is why your individual language don't exist because we are learning literally how to speak, in this case, English, or learning how to speak whatever language that you're learning. Okay. Now, this is not very important, but it's important distinguishing. It's important to distinguish the differences between language and languages. Language is an abstract property belonging to humans as a whole. So when we talk about language, we're talking about specifically the 6 characteristics that I mentioned to you earlier. Okay. Languages, however, are the specific ways groups of people communicate. Okay. Now, languages is things like Spanish, Chinese, English, Portuguese, whatever. Okay. But language, when we're describing language, that's when we're talking about kind of the more anthropological thing with the 6 elements and stuff like that. All modern human groups have fully developed languages. Languages are not simply an elaboration of the call system used by our ancestors. Okay. Languages use symbols that arbitrarily stand for something else. Learning new language is challenging. Okay, so the first 3 we kind of went over already, but it's just a reminder. Okay, again, all modern humans have fully developed languages. There's no such thing as an underdeveloped language. Languages are not simply an evolved version of call systems. Call systems and languages are completely different parts of our brain. Okay, languages use symbols that stand arbitrarily for something else. We talked about that. The sounds and the words that we use that we associate with certain meanings are all random, right? They're not necessarily tied to anything biological, right? So now that goes on to say that learning a new language is not easy, right? And why is it not easy? It's not only learning definitions or new labels of certain words, but it's also learning what is appropriate depending on the cultural context. Okay. Now, when we're talking about cultural context, we're usually talking about, again, easy examples like how do you speak to your parents versus how you speak to your friends versus how do you speak in a job interview versus how do you speak for this and that, right? This is different types of language being used in different culturally appropriate spaces. If you spoke like you speak to your friends with your professor, it'd be a little awkward. If you spoke if you spoke to your friends like you spoke to with your professor, that would also be kind of weird, right? So it is learning not only the meanings of new words, but when to use them, when is appropriate to use them. All right. Human communication extends beyond unspoken spoken languages and includes the clothes that people wear, length of time people keep others waiting for them, body gestures or kinesics, and finally, the acceptable distance between 2 or more people in a social setting or proxemics. I have some funny examples for all these. So, communication, right? So this is, even though these might not fall into language in particular, this is still part of linguistic anthropology. And this is a way that we communicate that's very different than language, right? So clothes that people wear, right? When you go onto campus, if you see someone with a button-down shirt, khakis, and dress shoes, right, and is older, you could probably assume that they're a faculty member, that they're a teacher, right? If someone is dressed in the blue uniform with the badge, you can probably assume that they're public safety, right? If someone is dressed in scrubs, you could probably assume they're part of the nursing program. These are all things that people associate with the different types of clothes that people wear. You could also associate other things, right? If the guy is wearing shorts and Jordans and a t-shirt to school, you could probably assume that that person is a student, right? Or sorry, that person is younger, okay? If that person is using a cane, you could probably assume that person a little older, whatever, right? You know, it obviously depends. There's always exceptions, all these things. But the main point is by looking at the way that people wear certain types of clothes, you can assume a lot about their background. Okay. Length of time people keep others waiting for them. This is very interesting. I have a funny story about this. My girlfriend is Puerto Rican, and we went to a wedding in Puerto Rico. Okay. And it is I think the wedding or like I forgot like the session or whatever it is was at the church or cathedral was at like 3 p.m. right? And I'm like ready. I'm like ready by 2, like maybe even before 2. And I'm just sitting there, and I see my girlfriend and her family running back and forth, and it's like 2:15 already. I'm like, dude, we're not gonna make it. And then literally they keep delaying. You know, they're doing their hair, doing all this other stuff, getting ready. I'm like, dude, we're never gonna make it. Anyways, we end up leaving at 2:45, and I'm like, well, at this point, we might as well not go. And guess what? We get there at 3:15 or 3:30, and everyone else is coming in at the same time, right? And that is because their understanding of time is different from my understanding of time. What is acceptable, unacceptable for on time, what's not on time is very different, right? The next thing, body gestures, right? Kinesics, the way people use their hands to speak. Sometimes it's interpreted as engaged, sometimes it's interpreted as rude, whatever, right? And the last one, this is also a funny story. The acceptable distance between two or more people in a social setting. If you have ever been to an Asian grocery market and then like you had an old lady get mad close to you in line, that is an example of proxemics because to you it's like, yo, like you're in my personal space, like get out of my personal space. But to them, it's like, oh, if I don't get close to this person, someone's gonna cut me because it doesn't look like I'm in line. And it's just like a different understanding of what is acceptable for you to be close. Another example is I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, might be a little dated, but they used to have these posters about like slow dancing, and they said basically like arm's length is appropriate and like anything closer is inappropriate. It's like what is it, leave room for Jesus or whatever, right? So that is an example. I also have of like what is appropriate and inappropriate in terms of being close to the other person. Okay, so human communication is multidimensional and can be examined using semiotics. The study of meaningful signs and their use. You don't need to know this; it's not that important. Signs are defined by their function. Icon looks like that which represents. So an example of this for this would be like a toilet, a picture of a toilet in front of a bathroom, right? That icon is indicating that behind that door is a bathroom. Index points to is beside or is carried linked to that which it signifies. If there was a picture of a toilet and an arrow going to the right, you can probably assume that, toward the arrow is the bathroom. And finally, symbol, a modus and indication in which the sign bears no intrinsic connection to that which it represents. Now, this one in particular is a little funny. It's literally if it was like, there's a sign out front that says bathroom is 2 doors to your left. That would be a symbol, right? So it just gets more and more disconnected as you go on. All right, speech represents spoken language. Language can be communicated, though, in unspoken ways, including writing, Morse code, and American Sign Language. Human communication is the sharing of information from one person to another. We already know that, right? So we think about writing, Morse, American Sign Language. These are different ways of writing, and when you have, or sorry, communicating, and when you communicate in this way, it's very different from when you're speaking. So, for example, when you're texting, you don't always text exactly how you'd speak. Obviously, it's closer to how you would speak than if you were to write an essay for me, obviously, but it's still different, right? So, like when I say, I don't know, LOL, LML, am I actually laughing out loud? Probably not, but it's funny, right? And if I was in person, I'd probably just say, oh, that's funny. But because we're texting, it'll be a different response. Okay. Now, this is a funny one. Let's talk about speech communities. So speech communities are languages associated with discrete groups of people. Speech communities can best be seen as communities of practice, an aggregate of people who come together around mutual engagement and endeavor, ways of doing things, ways of talking, beliefs, values, power relation, and short practices emerge in the course of this mutual endeavor. Okay. Now that sounds very complicated, but it's not. Speech communities are basically groups of people that have developed a sub-language depending on what they're doing, right? And so the easier examples are things like if you guys ever watched like Hell's Kitchen or anything with like those professional chefs, they have a different sub-language they use within the kitchen to communicate. What is it, like the foretop or what does they say? Or behind 2 minutes of service. Like these are all words that they're using. And even though it's English, obviously, because they're using it in the kitchen environment, it's different, right? Police officers have their own way of speaking. All those little codes they have on the radio, 10-4, all this other crap. That's an example of speech community. You know how to speak a different type of words, languages, whatever, because you are a cop or because you are a police officer, right? Military people, obviously, right? Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, whatever, right? These are all different ways of communicating. Now, to kind of stick this in your brain, so a speech community is any group of people that are doing something kind of like together or in the same direction or whatever, and they create their own little language, right? Basically, or their own little sub language because it is still English, right? I know what 10-4 means. I know what behind means, but I don't understand it in the context of being a police officer or a chef or whatever, right? Um, so Things like playing video games is a great example, right? I know this firsthand. Like, when you're running around on the map, like, oh, behind, or I don't know uh like, look, if you're playing a shooting game, and you're like, oh, the guy's behind the box, or behind, is a long, or whatever words you're using to describe it in the game. You're obviously speaking English, but you're using certain types of words because you're playing that game, right? Now, to stick this really in your head, the example I'm going to have is an old meme from back in the day of a person part of the Blood gang in America, right? And for those who don't know, Bloods and Crips are big gangs in America. And he wanted a order from McDonald's. If you are a Blood, you are not supposed to use the word, or you're not supposed to use the letter C because it is associated with being a Crip. So he said he wanted a chocolate bit bookie and a Boca-Bola, right? So you either want a chocolate chip cookie and a Coca-Cola, but because they are C words, he has to replace them with B, right? That is an example of a speech community, right? Because you are in the aggregate of people who want, or who are Blood gang members, you have to communicate in a certain way. Okay. So hopefully that will stick into your head a little bit. But basically, when we're talking about speech communities, we're talking about sub languages that you develop by doing something like together, right? And it doesn't have to be doing something in the moment. It could be just in the general direction. So, like, for example, I played a video game and you played a video game. We could have never met each other, but we know the language because we've played this video game. Okay. Now, it is important to note, though, that the when I say sub language, it is a Professor Fong kind of use of the definition, right? The differences that exist between language that is from a speech community and not from a speech community is two things: context and frequency of occurrence. Context is obvious, right? When the dude's yelling a four top, what they really mean is four people at a table, right? Without that context, if you just say four top, I have no idea what the heck you're talking about. I think you're talking about, like, you know, I don't even know what you're talking about, right? I have no idea. But the main thing is, because we're in the kitchen, you know what I'm talking about. And frequency of occurrence, how often are you saying this thing, right? Things like four top, behind, serving in five. These are things that you're going to say all the time. Okay, cool. All right. Last thing. Patterning in language involves morphemes, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. Morphemes are the units of meaning. Syntax is sentence structure. Semantics is meaning, and pragmatics is use of language. Right. So these four combine together kind of helps us analyze, like, language. Human languages have patterns at multiple levels, while non-human concepts do not. Right. So this is just to say that when we have human language, we can speak very differently to different people. I'd hope that the way you speak to me is very different than the way you'd speak to your friends, the way that's very different than the way you speak to your parents, so on and so forth. Okay. All right. So full circle. What can you tell about someone by the way they speak? You can tell a lot about somebody by the way they speak, right? You can tell whether they're happy, they're sad, they're threatening or non-threatening. You can tell whether they need help or they just want to harass you. You can tell whether they're trying to sell you something. But the thing is I want you to actually, so next time someone comes to talk to you, I want you to think, what things are they doing to make you know that, like, oh, they're here to ask me for questions, or oh, this person's safe, or oh, this person's dangerous? What are those small things? And then you'll have an understanding of what type of cultural things we need to learn in order to communicate fluently. Okay, very good. All right, announcements again. Just a quiz due at the end of this week. As always, if you have any questions, just shoot me an email at raymond.fong@kbcc.cuny.edu.